The vast majority of the population in Russia approves actions of their government in Ukraine.
Другий день війни.
The second day of the war, we evacuated from Kiev and I started working in the district hospital. I was sent to work in a women's consultation room, and just a few days later, a 12-year-old girl was brought to me, who was raped by 3 occupants. The girl was very traumatized. Unfortunately, she had not only psychological trauma, but body injuries. She hardly spoke. The first day we met her, she just cried. And then, when I started to ask her, she said something like, "I wish they had killed me, then abused me like that." It was in front of a family who could not help her. There were many cases when wrote us, "Violence and cruelty are a part of Russian life." Such a trend was set up by Putin. Then sexual violence is the norm for military tactics. Its victims are not only women and girls, but also men and boys.
Це місто Ірпінь, за спиною згорівший будинок, і, власне, саме із Ірпеня, із Бучі ми маємо...
This is the city of Irpin, with burned-down houses like the one behind me. From Irpin and Bucha we receive the highest number of appeals of victims on the actions of the Russian invaders, and in particular, on rape. As of today, we have 12 appeals of a kind from women, children, and a 19-year-old boy. In some cases, these were gang rapes. The youngest girl who survived rape is 14 years old. Others are 15 and 17. Unfortunately, the number of appeals is increasing. It will be a while before we have a massive wave of sexual assault reports, because today the victims are not ready to talk about it openly. It is very difficult for them. They are still in a lot of pain.
Не готові про це говорити відкрито, їм дуже складно, їм ще дуже боляче.
Дуже багато було випадків, коли гвалтували жінок цілими ротами, причому гвалтували...
There were many cases when Rotas raped women in the presence of children. Some raped little girls, died from injuries. Of course, these people should be punished. In any civilized world, they would have served their sentence. Some offenders are already identified, and they will definitely not be punished in their country, because the Russian government, the aggressor, encourages and supports such behavior.
Російській держави-окупанта, держави-загарбника стимулює і підтримує таку поведінку.
According to the latest data of the Russian analytical agency Levada Center, which is recognized as a foreign agent in the Russian Federation, 68% of Russian citizens approve of the activities of the government, 82% of the activities of the president, 66% believe that things in the Russian Federation are going in the right direction. And against the background of the so-called special operation, trust in television has grown. 64% of Russians believe that television objectively reflects the situation around Ukraine. 77% of Russians support Russia's aggression in Ukraine. The greatest support is shown by the oldest generation. 58% of Russians believe that they are not morally responsible for the deaths in Ukraine. Ordinary Russians are the source of power in their country. This is written directly in their constitution. Therefore, they are just as responsible for sexual violence during war as those who give commands and those who follow them. Go rape Ukrainian women, okay? Just don't tell me anything. Do you understand? Rape and don't say anything? Yes, so that I know nothing. You allow? Yes, I allow. Violence and cruelty are a part of Russian life. A bright evidence is the decriminalization of domestic violence, which was carried out by the Duma of the Russian Federation several years ago. There is no state policy in Russia directed against domestic violence. All the needs of positive change were destroyed, and therefore the violence that occurs in families, the violence that occurs against one's colleagues, female colleagues, and so on, we simply do not know all the dimensions. And we had to give her many hormonal pills to prevent pregnancy. Of course, we patched up all uterine ruptures. Psychologists talked to her as she was traumatized. She had been crying a lot, was hugging me all the time as if I was her mother. It was very difficult. On the 4th or 5th day, she told me about the rape in detail. She said that they beat her very hard, abused her. If she cried, they beat her even more. The rape was done in an unnatural way. I'm talking about anal sex. This is a natural way of intercourse. We called the law enforcement agencies and a psychologist, and everything was recorded. The girl testified, and all this was recorded and handed over to law enforcement agencies. Rape culture is approved and supported in Russian society. This concept describes a society in which violence is perceived positively and sexuality is perceived as having a violent nature. Rape culture condones violence against women and presents it as normal. Rape culture has been shaped by Russia's political and media discourse for many years. Such a trend was set up by Putin and is perceived by certain Russian target audiences as behavioral norm. Here are some quotes. You can complain to the International League of Sexual Reforms. The answer to the journalist of the American NBC channel to the question about Russia's interference in the US elections. A real man should always try, and a real gal should always resist. Putin's reaction to the questions about freedom of speech. Putin constantly uses metaphors of sexual perversions. Grandfather's genitals, lick the Americans in one place, grab the balls. His statement on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, if you like it or you don't, suck it up, my beautiful girl, was perceived by the Russian army as a direct instruction to action. What does this marker indicate? If domestic violence is the norm for their civilian lives, then sexual violence is the norm for military tactics, and it is not a war crime for them. These are absolutely acceptable military tactics from their viewpoint, tactics of control, tactics of dominance, tactics of humiliation.
Я просто не можу зрозуміти,
I simply cannot understand what a child who was raped at the age of 11 goes through, as she says. Mom, what did these men punish me for? Did I behave badly? And the same question was asked by a 6-year-old girl who was raped by 2 Russian soldiers in Irpin in front of her mother.
На очах матері її зґвалтувало 2 російських солдат.
Можу навести ось розмову з одним із тих, хто перебував.
I can quote here a conversation with one of those who was in the so-called basement in Donetsk for a long time. There for almost 2 months. Alexander says men and women were kept together in the basement. In the evening, one girl was called for questioning, and this questioning lasted for several hours. She returned and did not tell anything, and there were no traces of interrogation. That is, everyone understood and suspected that she was simply raped all that time. It is understandable that a person is not willing to talk about that. They tried to do it in front of their relatives. This probably gave them even more pleasure. She did not describe them. She did not see their faces, did not remember. One was wearing a balaclava. Her family was shot. They were at home. The family was simply shot. She had only mom and dad. Sexual violence is used by the Russian army as a tool of genocide, the destruction of the Ukrainian nation and its culture. One of my colleagues is from the Kherson region. Actually, she was initially detained on suspicion of Nazism because she is a teacher of Ukrainian language and literature. This gave the Russian occupiers reasons to believe that she was a supporter of Nazi ideas, and they actually searched her, took Ukrainian literature textbooks, destroyed them, and then raped her. In my opinion, they were aiming two targets of achieving control over her. Now, she has no right to teach anyone the Ukrainian language and literature, and they were trying to humiliate her as a woman. Thus, it is both gender and professional status-based discrimination. She is a teacher of Ukrainian language. That is, as a Ukrainian, as a native speaker of Ukrainian language, and as a woman, she was humiliated and tortured. She was lucky enough to leave, but instead her entire family remains under occupation there. And here, there is a great danger, because she is quite reasonably afraid that it will be very difficult for her family to survive there due to the fact that she escaped. Today we can already track certain algorithms of offenders' actions. At first, when the occupiers enter the village, they go from one house to another. Usually it is done by a small group of soldiers. There is always an older person among them. The vast majority of the victims said that no distinguishing marks could be seen. Their faces were covered, so it is not always possible to identify them. After some time they come again, for various reasons, sometimes to ask for something, sometimes to take something, and that's when the selection of victims for the future usually takes place. They always threaten with guns. There are threats that concern both this person directly and the person's family, parents, children, brothers and sisters if they have them. Well, there is certainly a threat that you should not tell anyone about it. Well, after that, rape takes place, usually repeatedly. Vera lived with her mother in a small village that was occupied by the Russians. On the first day, they went all around the households, saying that everything would be fine and that it would never be as bad as it was during Free Ukraine. In the evening, one of the soldiers came and asked her to go to the neighboring house and help with the wounded. When Vera entered, she saw a large bloodstain and 4 soldiers who were already drunk. All 4 took turns, raping her, and then ordered her not to get dressed, but to go out and play a game of Stoneface with them. Where they played cards, she had to satisfy them orally. They were abusing her verbally and put out cigarettes on her shoulders. And then, when they let her go, Vera had only one thought. She wished her mother would never find out about it, because her mother had heart issues and she might not have survived it. She saw the soldier who asked her for help. Several times more, he came to her and raped her in her own yard. This soldier said he could fall in love with her and marry her, but Vera was dirty because she had satisfied so many men. Today, reading the headlines of articles in the media, Vera thinks about how many women and girls What is necessary to know about sexual violence in Ukraine is that its victims are not only women and girls, but also men and boys.
Ті випадки, про які знаю я особисто,
These cases which I know about personally, the rape, the act of violence was committed by young people, very young people. The fact that a person is very young and already has such experience of violent actions, violent behavior, such inhumane treatment is astonishing.
насильницьких дій, насильницької поведінки, такого нелюдського ставлення. Він вражає.
В мене є випадок, там, де є матір і донька. Їх гвалтували одну і іншу перед однією.
I have a case where there is a mother and a daughter. They raped both of them in front of each other. There is no preferred age of victims and no common age of rapists. Rapists simply use every opportunity to rape, humiliate, intimidate civilians, threaten with torture. Questions like, does your husband serve? Or where is your brother? Or where is your father? That is, these are various methods of control, influence and humiliation.
Де ваш брат, чи де ваш тато? Тобто це різноманітні методи контролю і впливу і приниження.
Фактично вони хизувалися один перед одним таким.
In fact, they flaunted to each other telling these stories. One of the women reported that soldiers who came first taught the others that there were women so they could come and rape them. The next group came and continued the rape of those women who were raped earlier. That's why these are massive crimes. They were actually passing each other information.
Тому, будь ласка, ви можете зайти і продовжити.
I was very worried that she would not have suicidal intentions. We talked with her for about 2 weeks as a part of the treatment. We met her every day. She lived in the hospital so that we could constantly monitor her conditions, because she was completely depressed. She could not sleep, she could not eat, she slept very badly. She took a lot of sedatives, but constantly screamed. It was difficult for the child. During these weeks, we observed her, gave her hormonal drugs, treated her. Today, actions against Russian sexual violence in Ukraine are taking place in many European capitals, in Vienna, Riga, Berlin and others. The world thinks that if the International Criminal Court took over the investigation, then the question of responsibility is closed. Unfortunately, this is not the case, because the International Criminal Court, it will take only a few episodes to investigate. And all these tens of thousands of victims of war crimes, they remain the responsibility of the national system. No system in the world can cope with such a number of crimes, even during war. Therefore, in different countries, we should promote the idea of creating an international hybrid tribunal. The main purpose of these films is to demonstrate to foreign partners a wide range of crimes against the civilian population, their nature and geography, because, first of all, the objects of criminal encroachments are women and children. They are primarily civilian population, which proves criminal acts of the Russian occupier. On 19th June 2015, the UN General Assembly established the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflicts to draw attention to the need to end conflict-related sexual violence, provide support to victims of sexual violence, and honor those who fight to end these crimes or have lost life in the struggle. Today, this day is becoming relevant for Ukraine as well. During the period of our communication and treatment, she never once smiled. And only on the eve of Easter, when she was supposed to go abroad with her relatives, she came to me and gave me 2 little angels in blue and yellow color, which she made with her own hands, thanked me for my friendship, and for the first time I saw a smile on the face of this child. I will always remember her, and I hope that her life will change and she will be fine.
І не буде все добре.